I'm Allan Dodds Frank. Joining me is Leanna Nielsen, my co-host, and our special guest, Peter Bakstansky, former Senior Vice President of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Peter, thanks for joining us.
Nice to be here.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Isn't it always a dream of the Wall Street crooks to somehow have an insider in the Fed and get an advance notice of what they're going to do next?
I spent 30 years as an insider within the Fed. I spent a number of years outside looking in as a journalist, and I've never seen that.
But doesn't the Fed worry about that? I mean, wouldn't people make billions of dollars trading on inside information? I mean, which obviously might be a consequence if you suddenly had political appointees in there.
Fed governors are political appointees.
Right.
And the chairman is named by the president, confirmed by the Senate. They come through a complex political process. So they have to meet some tests of political acceptance. But are they going to be judged on their policy views, and will people who are politically motivated be more subject or potentially crooked than someone who's in it just because he or she came out of a financial world or just is greedy, came out of a university and is greedy? So I don't think that that issue is relevant in terms of crookedness at the Fed. Your basic point, though, is the potential for Federal Reserve malfeasance or people within the Fed taking advantage, and I've never ever seen it. There's been no example. Next year is the 100th anniversary of the Fed. I'll say virtually, but there's been no serious example of anybody at the Federal Reserve taking advantage.
Having worked at the Fed for as long as you did, how do you think Tim Geithner is doing?
I think he's doing very well. How has he done? The banking crisis is basically resolved at almost no cost to the American public, despite a lot of rhetoric about tens of billions of dollars showered on bankers. Virtually no cost to the American public. The growth has been almost in lots of areas, including employment, has been continuous since October of 2009, the start of the first fiscal year of this administration. So I think he's done very well.
What's his biggest strength as the Secretary of the Treasury?
Analytics, understanding both the politics and the economics and the dynamics of the economy. He understood early on in the crisis that banks had to be recapitalized. He understood that they had to understand the level of risks and introduced stress tests into banking, which were then released not just to the banks but to the public. And the public, seeing the breadth of risk and the bank's capital against it and the new capital because of the stress test that was required, public gained confidence in the banking system, whereas that confidence was waning, flowing out.
Do you think the Federal Reserve now should be involved in lobbying to institute the Volcker Rule, or does it need to still stay out of it?
The Fed has been assigned the responsibility of creating the rules to implement what Congress has passed.
Right.
Be it the Truth in Lending Act or Dodd-Frank or anything else, the Fed does. People then lobby the Fed. Hundreds, even thousands of letters saying you're doing this wrong. If you do this, it's going to kill employment. This is a job-killing thing. This is good. This is bad, etc. And the Fed has to make the decision. So the Fed doesn't have a lobbying position. The Fed has an assignment to carry out.
But how the Fed assesses which rules might work could have a big influence on the debate.
That's right. That is the burden, that's the gift that Congress has given to the Fed. It has said, you're the ones who have to set the rules now for the general principle that we have established. We don't want banks using proprietary funds for risky investments, funds that they have that have been given them by savers and depositors. That's the rule. It's fairly simple. The Volcker Rule is not a complex conceptual approach. Now the question is, well, what is the bank's proprietary rule? What is a customer? Is the customer someone who newly walks in the door, someone who exists and has a need? Can the bank satisfy that need if it is not using certain funds but using other funds? That's what they're going through.
Before you arrived, Leanna was asking me about a historical event, which is Citibank and Alan Greenspan, the former Federal Reserve Chairman, rolling over and letting Sandy Weill and Citibank break essentially the Glass-Steagall Act.
If the Glass-Steagall Act was never overturned, would we be able to have been in this economic crisis? Would things have gotten this bad if we had held on to it?
Probably. I don't think that there was the distinction between a commercial bank and an investment bank that created this.
So the fact they're talking about, sort of, that Sandy's kind of talking about bringing it back.
What it did create and what the crisis created with institutions that are so large that the question is, can they be managed? It wasn't because of Glass-Steagall specifically, but it was because technology and the size of the markets, of the globalization, and the ability to manage as many assets as you can, to trade assets at a huge volume, created this size.
What was your reaction when Sandy Weill said, oh, gee, maybe we should break up these big banks?
Oh, you can't help but smile. I mean, it's nice that he gets himself into the news, even though he doesn't have a particular responsibility these days. I don't know that that view has much interest for a lot of people. I mean, it's a curiosity that the man who was instrumental, as Liana's saying, in tearing down one of the key barriers now is saying, well, maybe it's not as good now. He doesn't say it was wrong then. He just said, maybe we don't need it now.
You're a much gentler man than I am. I was infuriated by the hypocrisy. I was infuriated at the time the way Alan Greenspan rolled over and then essentially let Citibank violate the law for months until Congress got around to actually passing the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act. And I just thought this was the final maraschino cherry on a messy Sunday.
Greenspan had a philosophy of laissez-faire, that more competition was good in the marketplace. And it's not that clear that more competition in the marketplace is a bad thing. It's how it was carried out.
Final question about Greenspan. Now that he's been gone for a while, how do you rate his legacy and his performance?
As a monetary policy implementer responsible for 18, 19 years for that in the United States, he was wonderful. He kept the growth going during periods when a lot of people were saying, stop the growth, it's dangerous, it's inflationary. He understood the expansion potential of the economy and the danger of cutting it off too short. And he managed that aspect of the Federal Reserve, its basic responsibility, its fundamental chore, very well. For better or worse, Alan Greenspan also, and the Federal Reserve, had a responsibility for bank supervision. And in that area, despite his extraordinary pragmatism and insight in the areas of monetary policy and macroeconomics, when it came to supervision, he had more of an ideological bent, a bent toward laissez-faire, a bent toward more competition is always good, keep your hands off, the market will work it out. Turned out that that wasn't accurate. And that's,
it was a big mess.
And there's a lot of pain now because of that.